G'day guys, Toast20 here, and welcome to the very first episode of Bordertown. This is a series that I've been chipping away at over the last few months. It has been taking quite a while to piece together. I think I recorded this first episode probably about a month and a half ago, and I'm only just finally putting some commentary over the top of it, which feels so damn fine because this kind of means I'm very close to be sharing it with you. Obviously, if you are watching this right now, I'm finished recording this episode. It just feels great to finally get it out there and get it received, because it is something that we wanted to share for so long. So, Bordertown, if you haven't guessed it already, this is a series that is not exactly based on one city. It's not even based on one particular country. This is a series that I am basing on the US and the Mexican border. This is a series that is based primarily on El Paso and Juarez. For those of you who aren't familiar with these two cities, El Paso is a city that is in the US, in the state of Texas. And on the other side of the border is Juarez, and Juarez is situated in Mexico. And dividing the two cities is the Rio Grande River, which is quite a famous river that stretches all the way down from the US into Mexico. And if you look at the path of this river, it really just paints this green road that is otherwise quite an arid and dry place. And it's not exactly your classic flat plain desert. There are just these massive mountains, these snow-capped mountains that are just dotted all the way around these two cities. So, I mean, the geography of this place is just also something that I find very inspiring and sort of sparked a lot of the inspiration for this build, and as well as the cities themselves. The cities are just very fascinating. They kind of host a lot of the different features that I love within cities just in the first place. And I just want to note that I'm not actually going to be recreating the two cities. I'm going to be using them as a base for my general ideas for what I want to build, but a lot of what I build is actually just going to be based on the two countries just in general. So I'm going to be pulling inspiration from Los Angeles and from Mexico City, and just everything that I love about the two countries. I've been to both Mexico and the US a couple of times, and I'm just a massive fan of both cultures. So that is sort of the spark of this series. Springwood is obviously something that is inspired by LA, but it is also just a mush of 100 different cultures into one. And look, I don't want to totally suck the fun out of everything that I'm saying right now, because I'm obviously very excited about this series. It's just something that I've been working on very hard over the last few months, and something that I've been excited about and very eager about for so long. But I think it's really important to talk about the fact that borders just in general are just very messy and very sensitive topics all the way around the world. And building an area like this does require quite a bit of respect, on my behalf. There's definitely topics that I'm not going to get into. I'm not going to get into any of the political side of things, because that is just something that I'm just not an expert on, and something that I just don't want to get into. I'm just building this based on the geography and the interest of this area, and politics is something that I'm just that is just not part of this series. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm basing this whole series on this area not to spark any political debate or to highlight any issues. This is purely an Australian romanticizing about two countries he's been to a couple of times, Google Images and Quentin Tarantino movies. This is coming from a place of fascination for me, and I can't resist pretty much building it, and that is sort of the reason why I'm starting a series like this. And also just keep in mind that the two cities that I end up building in this series won't exactly be pure representations of these two countries. I'm not trying to paint either country in a certain light. These are just places that I find very interesting, and that I want to sort of recreate in my own sort of Australian version. But yeah, they're just a couple of little things that I wanted to just mention before really jumping into this series. I've probably totally overanalyzed everything, probably making a much bigger deal about it than even on your mind. But I think it's sort of worth knowing, worth noting before I even jump into it. And if you have any questions for me, please shoot me through some comments or DM me in any of my social platforms that are down in the description below. And now that that's all mentioned, let me talk about what I'm doing right now. So like I said, this series is based on El Paso and Juarez, but I won't actually be recreating those two cities. Instead, I'm going to be pulling a lot of inspiration from a lot of the cities and countryside of Texas, and I'll also be pulling a lot of inspiration from northern Mexican cities and towns. But in contradiction to everything I just said, what I'm actually doing on screen is I'm completely copying the structure of the road networks of El Paso. When I say copying, I'm following just the general gist of it. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the grid layout of a city is essential to actually get some very nice flowing traffic. It's essential to figure out where all the buildings and the neighborhoods are going to sit. So, you know, not just like painting down where all the highways are going to go, but where I want the downtown to sit and where I want the main avenues to sit. And it kind of just helps to figure out the layout of your city by going through first and figuring out the actual structure of the grid. So this is something I've never done before. This is something I haven't done in Springwood. Springwood was built block by block. Every other series I've ever done is block by block. But this time around, I figured in order to get that feeling that the city has been created in an organic and natural way, which is sort of ridiculous to talk about as a city, but you know, cities like spawn from like particular places, and that's usually where the downtown sits. So I did want to recreate that and get a good idea of how the city has expanded over time. So you actually saw me at the very beginning of this episode put down a bit of a placeholder of the downtown, and that's because I wanted to see how big the skyline would look compared to the rest of its environment and where the downtown would be in relation to everything else. And then I just deleted it, and obviously I'm going to rebuild that another time. So this whole planning stage is really important to figure out how the city is going to look as the series progresses over time. And it also gives me a good idea where I'm going to be placing down some of the main features of this series. So for example, by placing down the road network, I can actually figure out where all the train lines going to sit, because El Paso actually has like a very extensive freight train network. I guess as it's a bit of a export-import hub for the border, I guess. So I will be doing quite a bit of work around the cargo side of things, but in terms of like the passenger service, there only really seems to be a bit of a regional network for passenger service trains. There's no like commuter trains here, which is, I think, a very cool thing, but there is like this great area in the downtown where the train line just goes underneath, so that I'm definitely going to recreate. And then there's the whole logistics of the border crossing, where there needs to be enough of a flow of traffic to sustain people from, people crossing the border. And I find that part really fascinating and something that I'm going to be focusing on within like episode 3, 4, and a little bit further on down the track, as well as we'll have a couple of different border crossings where there'll be like places where, you know, traffic will be coming in and out. And then there's a whole bunch of other road and train formats to this area that I would really like to recreate. But I mean, like, that is sort of the only parts of the city that I do want to really hone in on. Other than that, I will actually be going on my own tangent. For instance, I will be creating a much larger skyline than El Paso. So El Paso doesn't have the biggest skyline, but I think I'm going to go for a much taller and a much larger city, though of course it's not going to be the size of Springwood. However, I will be creating a much bigger style of a city than what El Paso is. And then for the Mexican side of the border, I will be actually going for a smaller town feel. So I will be pulling a lot more inspiration from the smaller towns around Mexico and incorporating those styles into that. And for those of you who are watching and thinking that they would love their hands on this map, well, for the first time ever, I'm actually going to release this map to the workshop, which is something, that I've never done before. I've promised it back at Broken Hill. I was going to do it, but I just never got around to it. I know it sounds just so easy just to upload a map and that's just the end of it. But there's actually quite a lot of work that goes into making it ready for people to download. That being said, there's going to be quite a lot of dependencies, like maybe about 15 dependencies that you'll need in order to see all the details that are put into it. It won't just be like a vanilla map. There will be a few bits and pieces that you'll need. And I will be releasing the map on the Steam Workshop after the second episode, because I do more terraforming on the next episode, as well as really working on the Rio Grande River as it stretches through El Paso, because it actually completely changes and there's a lot of, it kind of turns into this like concrete canal that it's probably like my best concrete canal I've ever created. I know I make these all the time in Springwood, but I really go to town on actually recreating how this thing looks. And I wasn't originally going to include that in the map that I released to the workshop, but I figured if you're going to download the map, you may as well get all the detail as well. So that'll be up on the Steam Workshop in a couple of weeks. It's already available to patrons, so if you want to jump onto Patreon and see it early, then you can go and do that. But if you want to wait, it'll be up there pretty shortly. And also, when I do release it, it won't be a map, it'll actually be a save game, because all this stuff that I do right now is all within the save game, but I don't really think that affects how you download it. But yeah, get excited for that. I'm looking forward to releasing it and seeing what people end up doing with this map that I've created. It is pretty much El Paso and Juarez, but there's a couple little differences that I've added. And on the topic of El Paso, I've mentioned El Paso like a trillion times already in this episode. However, because I am not recreating that city, I figured we need a new name. We need to totally have a completely different name. And I wanted to keep it in the spirit of using a Spanish name. El Paso has got such a great translation. The translation means the pass, which I think is very cool. But I did want to change it, so I was like conflicted there. So I was trying to find a whole bunch of other translations from, like the gateway or the entrance, or something that sort of like referred back to the fact that it is a place where there's like a lot of transit and a lot of back and forth between, like a bit of a gateway. But I couldn't find anything that was really sounding that cool. I did end up choosing the name Las Palmas, and I know like the translation is like the Palms, which is the complete opposite of where we are building right now, because we are not on the ocean, so like there's not really exactly very many palm trees around here. But the reason why I've chosen Las Palmas is not just because it is a totally awesome name, but there are a whole bunch of other cities around, even around this area, that is actually Las Palmas, even though it's not near a beach, even though it's not near the coastline. There's a whole bunch. So you know what? Like, stuff it. Like, that's the name. It's just, I figured like we gotta stick with something that sounds just as awesome. And I figured, seeing as it's an Australian recreating something that it's got zero experience with, zero understanding of what it actually looks like, we may as well just keep it in the spirit of that, and we'll just name it something that is kind of not really in the same topic. But yeah, this city is now called Las Palmas, and for the Mexican side of things, I've kept the name as Juarez, because I think Juarez is a great name just within itself. I wanted to keep it the same. So they're the two cities. We got Las Palmas on the US side of the border, and then on the other side we have of Juarez. And if you haven't noticed already, my translation into Spanish is incredibly terrible. So feel free to like make fun of me for every time I try to pronounce something in Spanish, because I know it's bad. When I went to Mexico, they knew it was bad. It purely can't help it. But I will give it a go. That's sort of half the reason why I chose the name Las Palmas, because at least I can actually pronounce it. Every time I was looking up cool Mexican names, I would find something that I would really love, but I couldn't actually pronounce it. So it actually helps to have something that I can comfortably pronounce. And hopefully when we do end up naming other places around this region, or even if I'm making references to places that are around around Mexico, like hopefully I can actually pronounce it. Otherwise I might just have to like record Google Translate reading it out. So that's going to be something you can look forward to in this series, is just an absolute butchering of the Spanish language on my behalf. But in terms of what I've been up to on screen, what I've been doing is figuring out how all the road networks are going to, basically work around the city. Now, I'm not going to the hugest amounts of detail with the roads, and I'm doing that purely because a lot of what I do, a lot of the detail work that I do is done when I actually detail those particular areas. So working on them right now, like if I was to go and detail all these highways, if I made them look super pristine, super nice, made them full of detail and full of trees and things like that, no doubt I'm going to change them later on. So it's just like a complete waste of time. So a lot of the roads that I'm painting down are purely just so I can get the idea of the traffic flow. They're being placed down so that I can kind of think, all right, so I want an interchange here eventually. I think it's going to look like this. Bang, there it is. A lot of the interchanges, actually all the interchanges that I'm putting down are ones that I've just downloaded from the workshop. They're a mix of ones that are either very nice in terms of the layout, or the ones that are just purely there as a bit of a base that I'm going to change later on down the track. Some of them I probably won't change, like the ones that sit really far out of the city. I probably will just leave them the way they are. But for a lot of them, I will be actually going through and changing them when I do work on the city later on. And I highly suggest you doing that as well. So, when you do download the map, you'll notice a lot of them just kind of like a bit average looking. But I think it's like important to detail or work on these when you actually get to that part of the city. Whereas if I was to go and change them all now, then I'd sort of totally, waste my time. And also something you probably noticed me doing a lot of is, when I actually place down these roads, they're all done with left-hand traffic. So this is like a massive complaint from, everyone. Everyone's complained about it in Springwood. I reckon every time I upload an episode of Springwood, there is about 5 comments of people saying you've got the wrong direction of traffic. So I'm very much well aware of it. In this series, I have in fact made it the right way of traffic for a US city. So, however, it is like a massive learning curve for me because I'm actually not used to it. So every time I paint down a road, it's in the wrong direction and then I have to go back and change it. So, I mean, if you want to make a game of it and figure out how many times I actually have to change the traffic or how often I place down the wrong style of traffic, it's going to happen so often in this series. But, I'm actually kind of glad that I've got the right way of traffic now, which is, something that I probably should have done from day dot in Springwood, but, can't change it now. So I've just been working on the road network, and you can see that it's very messy. Like there are roads that aren't even connected. Some roads like just totally intersect each other without any sort of connection. And again, I'm doing that purely just based on me figuring out where I want main roads to go. In fact, a lot of these roads may be deleted. They're purely just so I can get the direction of the grid. And you'll probably notice that like the direction of the grid isn't exactly just all in the same direction. And it would make so much more sense if I just put it all in the same direction. However, like cities just don't do that. Like I know that it might look like cities that follow a very structured grid pattern, but in all natural facts, they have to contour to the landscape a lot. And there are some exceptions, like New York is just pure grids. A lot of other US cities are just pure grids. However, a lot of the grids of cities is based on landscape. And this is very much the same with El Paso and Juarez. As the Rio Grande River snakes its way through the cities, the grids have to sort of like match up where the river like hits the city. And also there's quite a lot of mountains around, which is also affecting the way that the grids sort of look. And I really like it. Like, I love the way that the city actually has to, have such an unusual way of, sort of forming. So there are like bits of grids that are in the same direction, but then they also, change as the landscape changes around them. So that is something that you will notice within the series. Like, a lot of my series are like this too. I think it's probably also because I'm from Sydney, and Sydney has the most ridiculous grid pattern. Like, I think the first time I went overseas, I was amazed at how straight roads are, because in Sydney, they're just like, there is not a single straight road. I feel like they are just all over the place. For like a flat country, for some reason, Sydney just has to be like built on just hills and around coastlines. So I think that probably like isn't a much of a help for when I start building any other city in City Skylines, because I'm so used to roads curving all over the place that I can't build straight roads. They seem so unnatural to me, whereas in fact they are quite normal around the world. And now you've just seen me like work on the train network a bit, and forming this road network so early on in the series means that I can form such a realistic train network, because so much of the train network relies on the pre-existing grids of a city. And that's something that I've always struggled with Springwood, is that because I've been building it block by block, the train network just it might seem a bit realistic, and it's because I've sort of like worked on it quite a lot, but it's been a really massive challenge for me with Springwood, is trying to make a train network work around a city that has been formed kind of not how a city usually forms. Whereas in this series, I've actually really thought about where all the train network's going to go, and where all the road networks is going to go, and that's already just a massive improvement, I find, with the layout of the city. And you're probably noticing how big the city actually looks right now, but it's probably, I reckon, going to be about half the size of Springwood. The way that like City Skylines cities work is you do have to sort of scale them down a lot. Again, with Springwood's like a whole bunch of sprawling suburbs and industry and a very realistic downtown. Whereas this series is going to be very, very scaled down. I mean, if you imagine Los Santos in GTA being a representation of LA, well, this is going to be a scaled down representation of a city in the US, if that makes sense. So that is sort of like how I'm going to manage working on such a big project like this, and also kind of keeping down the frame rate a little bit, although it's like, I'm quite a few episodes already into this series and the frame rate's already pretty low. But I think that's going to really help out with like actually managing a city and another project that's going to be quite big as well. But guys, that's pretty much it for this episode. There's so much I didn't really touch on, but I'm gonna jump straight into the next episode and start recording it right now, and I'll talk about all the things that I didn't really get to talk about in this episode. If you have any questions about this series, then do leave them in the comments below, or if you would like to DM me on any of my other social platforms, do that as well. I'll be on the Discord just to chat about it, so if you want to come on and actually have a conversation, then go and join me on Discord, and feel free to ask any questions. We can go back and forth. But until the next episode, have a great week, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.